Celebrity cameos used to be a nice little surprise that would pop up once in a while, but it was always just that, a small cameo. The person would have maybe a few lines of dialogue and that's it. Often in shows like Star Trek, the audience might not even recognize the celebrity was involved because that person would be completely unrecognizable wearing an alien costume. Believe it or not, this is Mick Fleetwood, the drummer from Fleetwood Mac. This is basketball player James Worthy, and even the literal king of Jordan, Abdullah II. Probably my favorite was the surprise twist involving Kelsey Grammer. That was a particularly strong episode by itself, and the ending was just the icing on the cake. Unfortunately, modern Hollywood, especially Disney and Marvel, have become heavily reliant on cameos just to get people to tune in and watch. With She-Hulk, we had the rapping horse lady, which also led us to this magnificent piece of cinema right here. Sadly, Star Wars is not immune to this, and the writers of this series felt the need to bring in not one, not two, but 3 celebrity cameos to fulfill major roles in this episode. With one of those characters carrying around a few hundred extra of a different kind of role. In fact, at her size, rolling is probably the preferable mode of transportation. The Mandalorian is bad. Episode 6. We open with a group of aquatic aliens on a ship, and they notice an Imperial destroyer is approaching them. They panic because they think it's a warlord of some kind from the old Empire, and they attempt to bribe the captain. The scene appears very tense because the Imperial ship captain refuses the bribe, and the aliens think they're about to be destroyed, when it's revealed that it's actually a bunch of Mandalorians on the other ship, and the reason why they're here is to recover the son of a Mon Calamari viceroy. Suddenly, one of these Akbar aliens bursts onto the bridge of the ship and starts behaving like a stupid, spoiled child. Apparently, he was in love with the alien ship captain and they were trying to run away together. The ship captain quickly turns over the Mon Calamari to the Mandalorians, but not before we get to witness this.
Oh my God!
Believe it or not, this is only the 4th most disgusting thing that we're gonna see in the episode. This entire intro was a setup for a few brainless, unfunny jokes that didn't add anything to the story and really fell flat. But let me ask you, how long do you think this intro was? How much of the episode time was consumed by this pointless nonsense? 30 seconds? Maybe a minute? How about over 4 minutes?
Why?
This pathetic attempt at humor that added nothing to the story ate up over 4 minutes of the episode's runtime. And don't forget all of the other costs associated with creating it. The set, the costumes, the extensive CGI. This intro used up a lot of resources for something that wasn't funny and is pointless to the main story. Is there any wonder why Disney's viewership is collapsing? Moving over to the show's main character, who is now headed towards a planet. Alongside Bo-Katan is Goku, and I suppose Mando is there as well.
Out of the way, you.
They're looking for the Mandalorian fleet that used to be under Bo-Katan's control. The ships are quickly located on what is described as an independent planet that for some strange reason has only a single city under a large dome. I can't remember the exact name of the city. I think it's something along the lines of, real communism has never been tried.
Now come on, China!
As they get closer, Bo-Katan receives a transmission from the city that welcomes them to the Outer Rim's only remaining direct democracy, and the show puts quite a bit of emphasis on that last part. If this was the only mention of that, then I would probably just make a joke about it and move on, but unfortunately the writers have decided to use this episode as a way to push their own real-world anti-American agenda, which will require me to give a little bit more of a rebuttal, but we'll get to that later on. But don't worry, it gets worse. Suddenly, Bo-Katan loses all control over her own ship. It is now completely and totally under the control of the people in the city. Bo-Katan has no choice but to simply sit back and wait as the people in the city control her ship and fly it to a docking section that they want her to use. And I just want to point out that considering the fact that the writers are using this episode to push their communist agenda, I think it's kind of funny that the magical utopia city under a dome just took over control over someone else's private property. I can say with absolute certainty that the writers were too stupid to realize the irony of this situation.
Everything woke turns to shit.
But secondly, and more importantly, the technology being used by the commies in the dome would completely and utterly break Star Wars worse than anything that has ever happened before. In The Last Jedi, the Holdo maneuver, which allowed a ship to use hyperspace as a weapon, did tremendous damage to the Star Wars universe and the continuity. The use of that tactic would have destroyed all future space battles and also called into question why it had never been used before, like when the Rebels were dealing with the Death Star. This was lazily retconned in the third movie, Rise of the Skywalker, where the Holdo maneuver was hand-waved away, saying that was a 1 in a million chance and it was unreliable, and they couldn't hope to ever try to replicate it ever again. And while that situation is moronic, at least they dealt with it and got rid of the possibility. What is happening in this episode, however, is even worse. The writers have now introduced a new technology that is capable of commandeering an enemy vessel from a significant distance away. And to be clear, this is not the same as a tractor beam that just grabs onto an enemy ship. These are more common in Star Trek, where they're also more powerful. However, weaker versions do exist in Star Wars as well, and they have been used in the past. But that is not what is happening here. This is not a tractor beam. Instead, the commies in the dome are using a technology that completely takes over control of an enemy vessel. Once again, irony that is probably lost on the writers.
It is a tale told by an idiot.
This group of people would become the most powerful in the entire galaxy using this technology. It is ridiculous, and the writers clearly have not thought about the galaxy-sweeping ramifications of introducing this kind of technology. There is no need to build your own big fancy Death Star when you can let someone else do it and then just commandeer it remotely. Regardless, the ship is guided to a port, and after disembarking, they realize that all of the droids used on this planet are old Imperial. They get into his shuttle and request to be brought to where the Mandalorians are located. However, the computer brings up some stupid galactic law that was very obviously created about 3 minutes ago, specifically for this show, specifically for this exact situation. The computer continues, saying in order for them to go to the special peacekeeping zone where the Mandalorians are, Mando and Bo-Katan must first get permission from the leaders of the planet, and then the shuttle quickly takes off. After about a minute of wasted screen time, we're introduced to the leaders of the planet, which turns out to be Jack Black, and what I can only assume is a hippopotamus wearing a dress.
I hate this! It is revolting!
This next scene has an incredible amount of stupidity, but rather than stopping and explaining stuff with each and every line of dialogue, I'm gonna quickly explain what happens in the next scene, and then I'll tear it apart piece by piece. After Mando and Bo-Katan are invited to sit down, Jack Black says, "Allow me to address the bantha in the room," which at first I assumed was the thing sitting next to him, but apparently he was being metaphorical.
The truth is ugly. It is brutal and harsh and disgusting.
Jack Black explains that he used to be an Imperial officer, however, he went through the Republic's amnesty program, which brought him to this planet in order to help him rebuild it. During this time, he fell in love with the manifestation of diabetes that is sitting next to him. We learn that she was part of the planet's nobility prior to the Empire. It sounds like she's the only one left, which leads me to believe that she probably ate them.
Was a bit controversial, to say the least.
However, the creature of crippling heart disease claims that it was time for the planet to move away from nobility and into a new direction. I'm assuming part of that direction was towards a buffet, but they also had their first ever direct democratic elections on the planet. And of course, Jack Black and the Buffalo Bride ended up winning that election. We learn the reason the Mandalorian fleet is here is because the Republic forbids this planet from having a standing military because one of its leaders, namely Jack Black, is a former Imperial officer. So instead of having their own military, the planet hires out mercenaries as a private peacekeeping force, although I don't know why they would even need to do that when they have technology that allows them to commandeer any vessel they want from an extreme distance.
Excellent point.
Jack Black then says that because they don't have to spend any money on a military, it allows them to use all of their resources on the people, which of course doesn't make any fucking sense, because even if they don't have their own military, they're still paying the Mandalorians, which means they're still using money that's going towards a whatever. Anyways, the writers are morons. Bo-Katan asks for permission to go and see the other Mandalorians, and Jack Black says he will grant that request if Bo-Katan and Mando are able to solve a problem for them. As previously mentioned, the droids on this planet are former Imperial, many of which were used exclusively for war, most notably the battle droids. They have all been reprogrammed, but now some of them have begun to malfunction and attack the people. Bo-Katan asks the obvious question, why hasn't the Mandalorian peacekeeping force been used to take care of this? And the land whale responds by saying the planet's charter forbids any standing army from entering the city, and that is why they want Mando and Bo-Katan to deal with the situation. Alright, let's go through this. I don't ever try to specifically make a political point, but when you have writers like the ones on this series who use an entire episode to overtly try to force their stupid ideology down the audience's throat, I feel like I need to provide a rebuttal to that. During this episode, on multiple occasions, characters will put an extreme amount of emphasis on the fact that this domed city is what's known as a direct democracy. And that's because in the real world, Democrats, like the ones who wrote this show, want to change America from being a constitutional republic into a direct democracy. A lot of people have the misguided belief that these two forms of government are similar, when in reality they are practically opposites. A constitutional republic puts strict limitations on the government and what it is capable of doing to the people. This means that you end up with a country that is built on the rule of law, whereas a direct democracy has no such limitations. 51% of the people can do absolutely anything they want to the remaining 49%. There are no such things as individual rights because they can be removed at any time with a simple majority vote. Essentially, it's 3 wolves and a sheep voting on what they should eat for dinner, and it never ever turns out very good for that sheep. So in a direct democracy, what you end up with is a country that is not built on the rule of law, but instead is simply run by the mob, who makes decisions based on emotional responses rather than critical thinking and logic. For quite a while now, Democrats have been trying to make this change to America. They became even more aggressive with it after a certain orange man became president in 2016. If America was changed into a direct democracy, it would effectively mean that California would get to decide almost everything at a federal level. New York, Texas, and Florida would also have some small say, but essentially everything significant would be decided by the voters in California. And considering how fucking awful California is, you can see why this would be a bad thing. But don't worry, it gets worse. The city under the dome is being depicted as a perfect utopia for the explicit reason of trying to associate that with the government of a direct democracy. This is the writers trying to trick everyone into believing that if only America went this route as well, then we could eliminate all the problems of society. There wouldn't be any hunger, no poverty, no crime, etc., etc. The people that live under the dome, for the most part, don't even have to work, and everyone seems to be wealthy somehow. But the writers aren't done yet, because they're also pushing something else in this episode that has been common within the last couple years for the Democrats, namely defunding the police. This city under the dome has no real police force. They have constables, which are basically useless social workers. And again, the writers are trying to imply that under a direct democracy, it's so perfect and it's such a magnificent utopia that they don't have any crime and therefore they don't need any police. Except in this case, they actually do when it turns out the droids have been malfunctioning and they start to attack people. But the writers still aren't done yet because they're also pushing something else, and that is every single citizen in this dome city is prohibited from carrying any weapons. They are not allowed to defend themselves, which is another thing that Democrats in the real world have been trying to push for years. And of course, this proves to be a problem when the droids start attacking people because, well, they can't defend themselves. In the episode, we're told that the only reason why Mando and Bo-Katan are allowed to carry weapons within the city is because it is, quote, part of their religion as a Mandalorian, and that is why they are uniquely positioned to deal with the droid problem. Later on in the episode, we'll learn that all of the problems in the city with the crime and the violence are the direct result of one guy who is very clearly being depicted as right-wing, and once he's gone and punished, everything goes back to being a perfect utopia. So for those of you that want to keep track, the writers on this show, who happen to be Democrats, are making the not-so-subtle suggestion that if America was to become a direct democracy and got rid of all of those problematic right-wing people, then the country would become a utopia where everyone is wealthy, there's no hunger, there's no poverty, no crime, and most people don't even need to work, just like what we're seeing in this show. However, reality would say otherwise, because if you look at any of the states or cities that are run by Democrats right now, using all of the exact same methods that are being promoted in this show, you will notice that they are disgusting hellholes riddled with homelessness, poverty, hunger, crime, unemployment, and of course, the streets are full of trash and human feces.
You can smell the shit from 5 miles away.
Alright, that's enough of that stupid nonsense. Let's go back to the other kind of stupid nonsense that is the plot of this show. So the two morons visit Doc Brown, who shows footage of the droids malfunctioning, which leads them to destroying stuff and attacking people. Bo-Katan asks why the person in charge of the droids doesn't just shut them off, and Doc Brown reveals that he is in fact the one that's in charge, and he happens to have a failsafe cutoff switch built into the system, which turns out to be a comically large red button on his desk.
You serious?
Now, this sort of thing would work perfectly fine in a cartoon or an over-the-top satirical comedy, but it absolutely does not belong in this show. Yes, this series has comedy, and yes, it's a science fiction fantasy with magic powers and aliens, but it doesn't change the fact that the show is supposed to be grounded in some sort of fictional realism. What I mean by this is that there are certain things that you can expect and still believe will happen because it's part of the universe that's built around Star Wars. But having a big red glowing button that is capable of shutting off all of the droids in the entire city just sitting on this guy's desk where anyone could push it at any time is utterly absurd.
I expect nothing, and I'm still let down.
The button isn't even properly protected. There are no safeguards. Someone could simply lean against the desk and accidentally press this button that would shut down all of the droids in the city. There is a point at which the audience can no longer find themselves immersed in a story. It is the point when the audience sees the zipper on the back of the monster's suit. That is this moment right here.
You don't have a better bad idea than this?
This is the best bad idea we have, sir.
But don't worry, it gets worse. Do you remember what I said about direct democracies being nothing more than mob rule? Well, that pops up again here in this scene, because when Mando asks why they don't just shut down all of the droids, Doc Brown says that the citizens voted against any interruption to droid services. Now remember, these droids are destroying stuff and attacking people. There are genuine hazards to having these droids still in operation, and yet the system of government that is a direct democracy allows for it to happen. And that is because the majority of the citizens do not want their daily lives interrupted, and therefore they voted to make sure that the droids remain active, despite the fact that the droids are attacking people. So the majority got to decide something that is the detriment to the minority. It is 3 wolves and a sheep voting what to eat for dinner.
There it is! There it is!
Doc Brown continues saying that the people didn't want to disrupt droid services because they simply cannot live without it. Almost no one in the city has to work, they spend their entire day engaging in recreation, and participating in the direct democracy. He actually says that. I didn't add it in. He says that if he were to shut down the droids, then the people wouldn't know how to survive. What he is saying here is something that conservatives and the right wing in general are always promoting, that people need to be more self-sufficient, that an individual should be able to take care of himself, that you should have a job and you should take pride in your own work. You should never allow the government to handle all aspects of your life. Obviously, the fucking writers had an agenda with this character and the dialogue.
Well, it's tough to get any more obvious than that.
Knowing this, I'm sure it wouldn't surprise any of you to learn that Doc Brown is going to end up being the villain of this episode. Regardless, Mando asks what they're supposed to do, and Doc Brown says that they need to seek out and decommission any of the rogue droids. He tells them that they can find a list of all those malfunctioning droids with a group of Ugnaughts that work for the city. So they head down to the droid repair bay and waste several minutes talking to those Ugnaughts. Eventually, Mando is able to get the information, and he even drops the line of dialogue, "I have spoken," because nostalgia bait whenever you can, I guess.
He said it! He said it!
With the list, they go and investigate some battle droids. Mando intentionally tries to provoke them, most ignore it, but then one does seem to get angry and takes off running. They chase it through the streets for several minutes until Mando is able to tackle it to the ground. Bo-Katan sneaks up behind it and hits it a few times with blasters, which somehow destroys the battle droid.
Right.
I want to remind you that this is not one of those stupid throwaway Roger droids that even the Gungans were able to deal with. This is a fucking battle droid. They are extremely durable and very dangerous. They are one of the most fearsome droids that were used in the Clone Wars. They were specifically designed to be resistant against blaster fire. Taking one out usually required large, heavy blasters like this one, or cannons that were mounted on a vehicle. A few hits from the light one-handed blasters that Bo-Katan uses would do absolutely fuck all nothing to this battle droid, but it's needed for the plot to move forward, so it happens.
Logic is an integral part of narrative structure.
But this nonsense gets even more absurd if you go back about a minute, because when the battle droid first tried to escape and run away, Bo-Katan was shooting at it with her blaster. She missed, but she did manage to hit a different battle droid several times, and that battle droid just kind of shrugged it off as if nothing had happened and continued walking forward. So that battle droid was almost completely impervious to these small light blasters, and yet the one that tried to run away is somehow destroyed instantly? It doesn't make any sense.
This is terrible.
It gets even more dumb, though, because Bo-Katan searches the droid while it's laying on the ground, and she finds something called a spark pad. I don't know where the droid was supposed to be holding this, because he's not exactly wearing pants that have pockets. Once again, it doesn't seem to matter. The plot needs this to happen so that it can move forward. On the spark pad is the name of a droid bar with an address, and yes, that is as stupid and ridiculous as it sounds.
It's very convenient.
Very convenient.
They head over to the droid bar where they see a whole bunch of droids that are drinking some sort of beverage. They're not actually drinking it like a human would. Instead, it's just a tube that seems to be pumping the liquid into the droid body. They approach the bartender, and Mando just kind of flips out and starts threatening all of the droids in there.
I started blasting. Bang! Bang!
Now, I know some of you are saying, well, hang on a second. They did establish that Mando has a hatred of droids, but you also need to remember that the character has already moved beyond that. He grew to trust and even become friends with the IG-11 droid, and he was also able to work with the astromech droid, though considering the astromech kind of betrayed him to the X-Wing pilot, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. But the point is that Mando no longer has a complete hatred and distrust of droids anymore. What we're seeing in this scene is Mando is not behaving how he should be in Season 3. Instead, he's acting how he would have in Season 1, which means that all of the character growth that he's gained over the last couple seasons is being thrown out of the window for no apparent reason. However, the bartender says that he wants to work with them because he and the other droids are concerned about the malfunctions as well. The droids know if the malfunctions continue to occur, they may all be replaced or decommissioned, and none of them want that. In the back room, the bartender explains that the liquid the droids are drinking is some special fluid that acts as a lubricant and also contains nanoparticles that repair damaged code within the droids. And I just gotta point out, that is not how fucking code works at all.
What? No.
I'm pretty sure that this is the first time that sort of thing has been mentioned in the Star Wars universe, and it was likely created explicitly for this episode, which is why it's so idiotic. Regardless, the bartender discovers that all the malfunctioning droids on the list did go to that bar, and they all happened to drink from the same batch of nanoparticle fluid, which they now suspect had been corrupted somehow. Mando and Bo-Katan head over to what appears to be a morgue for droids, which also doesn't make any sense at all, because any of the damaged droids should have gone back down to the maintenance facility with the Ugnaughts. There's no reason to have a separate facility for droids that looks like a morgue. It's just dumb. Regardless, a technician pulls out the battle droid from earlier and has a different droid remove some of the fluid for testing. The technician checks the fluid and discovers that instead of nanoparticles, there are actually nano droids within the fluid. These droids have a chain code on them that identify the person who created the nano droids as the Techno Union. Another quick search reveals that the person who requested these things to be delivered to the planet is none other than Doc Brown, and the technician also adds in that this sort of thing is illegal.
Oh no!
They all start wondering whether or not the nano droids are still active in the fluid, which is immediately answered when the other droid who drew the fluid suddenly goes berserk and starts spinning lasers around the room, but Mando cuts it in half with the Darksaber. Mando and Bo-Katan go back to the security office to speak to Doc Brown. They confront him about what he did, and he stands up threatening to press the big red button, which he now says will convert all of the droids back to their original programming, which will cause them to attack the people in the city. This is, of course, contrary to what we learned earlier in the episode, that the big red button would instead just shut them all down. I do suppose it's possible he was lying earlier. Either that or the writers just decided to change it because fuck consistency, I guess. And just in case you aren't completely convinced that this episode is thinly veiled political allegory bullshit fest, Doc Brown then reveals that he's a separatist and that he followed the amazing, magnificent Count Dooku, who he believes was a visionary, but was improperly ousted from the Jedi. For fuck's sake. But then Bo-Katan zaps him with a stun dart and he falls over. Luckily, he falls backwards instead of towards his desk, because then he would have hit the big red button and, you know, had all the droids attack everybody. Or maybe it would have just shut them down. Who knows? Who cares at this point? They bring Doc Brown back to the palace with Jack Black, and we get to see Globjor, the demonic representation of gluttony, playing a game that probably involves the most physical exercise she has seen in quite a while.
So basically it was like a diet regime if it was run by the body positive movement.
Mando explains the cause of the malfunctions, and Jack Black and Doc Brown get into an argument where Doc Brown says he's angry that there's an ex-Imperial who's now running the planet. Then we get an agonizing speech from what appears to be the second moon of Jupiter, who rambles on about how Doc Brown served her family well and that she expected more from him. Doc Brown immediately makes a very pathetic apology, and she says that maybe she can trust him at some point in the future, but for now, he needs to be exiled to somewhere, who cares? Like the support frame in this building underneath the actress, it cannot be stressed enough just how bad of an actor she truly is. Throughout this entire episode, every single line that she's delivered was spoken as if she was merely reading it off of a cue card. There is nothing even approaching any kind of realism, and the only weight that she is bringing to this role is that of morbid obesity.
Don't blame others for your bad decision!
Finally, Mando and Bo-Katan are granted permission to visit the other Mandalorians on the planet, but before they leave, the scene gets even more idiotic when the nebula comprised of fatty deposits presents them both with a literal key to the city and says that they are welcome back at any time to their domed paradise. During this entire scene, there must have been a guy standing slightly off camera holding this fucking ridiculous key just so that it can be presented to Bo-Katan. So what were they doing here? Were they planning to give the key to them the entire time? They just had someone go and get it and wait around until the mission was completed? Or was it a spur of the moment thing? Like, what the fuck is going on here? Why did they bother including this unbelievably stupid scene? The writers do not understand how ridiculously contrived all of this looks. It is fucking idiotic.
Best season ever!
But don't worry, it gets worse. Yes, believe it or not, somehow there is still more stupid stuff to happen in this episode, because they go to visit the other Mandalorians who refuse to follow Bo-Katan. She challenges the leader, who is this guy right here, and of course she easily defeats him in one-on-one combat because, you know, she's amazing and whatever, girl boss, something something. However, the Mandalorians say that they still don't want to follow her because she doesn't have the Darksaber anymore, which seems a bit strange because they were all willing to follow this guy, and he doesn't have the Darksaber, but, I mean, I guess that doesn't matter. But then side character Mando chimes in and says that if Bo-Katan needs the Darksaber, then she will have it. Initially, she refuses because she says that it's not a gift to be given, no matter how well intended. It must be won through battle. Mando then says to everyone that a short time ago, he was defeated in combat, and Bo-Katan then destroyed the alien that had defeated him. He explains the logic that when he was defeated, the rightful possession of the Darksaber was passed to the alien, and then when Bo-Katan defeated the alien, the rightful possession of the Darksaber should have gone to her. He then asks all the Mandalorians present if this makes sense to them, and like a bunch of morons, they say, yes, it does make sense, and then they agree that Bo-Katan is the proper owner of the Darksaber, and of course, this is a bunch of nonsense. And that's because Mando was never actually defeated in combat. He never lost a battle. Instead, he was simply ambushed and captured in a trap. The rules that have been established for the Darksaber requires actual combat, preferably one-on-one. That never happened with Mando. Not a single fucking person, whether it's the Mandalorians or anyone else who might be interested in the Darksaber, would consider that to be a proper set of combat. So even though Bo-Katan killed the alien creature thing, he was never in rightful possession of the Darksaber because he didn't actually defeat Mando in combat. According to the very rules that they have already established in this stupid fucking show, the alien wasn't the actual owner of the Darksaber at that time. But none of it seems to matter because Mando passes over the Darksaber to Bo-Katan, she ignites it, and it causes all the weirdos on social media to start spazzing out. This episode was extra awful because not only did it include more terrible acting than usual, it also had a completely incoherent plot and further sidelined the supposed main character of the series. But on top of all that, it also made a fairly significant insult to Doc Brown and just kind of made him look like an idiot, which really doesn't seem appropriate. I'm not sure if a trip in the DeLorean is going to be enough to remove this travesty from history. But thankfully, that's the end of episode 6.
I'm taking shots at the enemy. I'm gonna make it to the top, leave a legacy. If I got something to say, you better let me speak. Turn it up a new degree, bitch, you ain't seen anything. I pop off with the new rock, electronic, blow the sonic